Imagine this. You're standing in front of a mirror, but instead of your reflection staring back, you see the face of everyone who has ever hurt you. Your manipulative ex-partner, the toxic friend who drained your energy, the narcissistic boss who made your life hell, the cruel parent who never showed you love. One by one, their faces morph and shift, but something chilling begins to emerge beneath each mask. You catch glimpses of something that looks disturbingly familiar, something that looks like you. Now imagine that this isn't just a nightmare, but the most profound truth about human psychology that Carl Jung ever discovered. What if every person who has caused you pain, every toxic relationship that has consumed your life, every pattern of suffering you can't seem to escape, what if all of it exists because of something you refuse to acknowledge about yourself? You wake up tomorrow morning and realize that your entire life has been an elaborate theater production, and you've been unconsciously casting the same characters over and over again. The cruel authority figure, the unavailable lover, the friend who betrays your trust, the person who makes you feel small and worthless. You keep meeting them in different bodies, different names, different circumstances, but the roles remain exactly the same. And here's the part that will shatter everything you think you know about relationships, about fate, about why terrible things keep happening to good people. You are the director of this play. But how could this be possible? You didn't choose to be abandoned. You didn't ask to be manipulated. You certainly didn't invite betrayal or cruelty into your life. You're the victim here, aren't you? You're the one who keeps trying to love people who can't love you back. You're the one who keeps trusting people who prove themselves untrustworthy. You're the one who keeps giving your energy to those who only take and never give back. Yet what if your victimhood is the very thing that creates your perpetrators? What if your desperate need to prove you good is what attracts those who will exploit your goodness? What if your refusal to acknowledge your own capacity for darkness is what draws darkness to you like a magnet? What if the very parts of yourself that you've banished, denied, and buried alive are the ones orchestrating every painful encounter you've ever had? This isn't about victim blaming or suggesting that you deserve the pain others have caused you. This is about something far more mysterious and infinitely more powerful, the shadow psychology that Carl Jung discovered, which reveals that we don't just attract random people into our lives. We attract the precise individuals who will force us to confront the aspects of ourselves we've spent our entire lives running from. Think about the person who triggers you most intensely, the one whose behavior makes your blood boil, whose very existence seems to offend something deep within your soul. Now consider this unsettling possibility. What if that person is showing you exactly what you look like when you think no one is watching? What if their cruelty mirrors your own hidden cruelty? What if their selfishness reflects your own buried selfishness? What if their emotional unavailability is a perfect reflection of how unavailable you are to your own authentic self? This is the great paradox that haunts human relationships. We are simultaneously attracted to and repelled by the same qualities. We fall in love with someone's confidence, then resent their arrogance. We admire someone's independence and feel abandoned by their emotional distance. We're drawn to someone's passion, then frightened by their intensity. We seek what we lack, but we also fear what we've disowned within ourselves. But here's where it gets even more disturbing. What if you've been unconsciously seeking out these painful relationships, not despite your healing, but because of it? What if your soul knows something your conscious mind refuses to accept, that you cannot become whole until you face the parts of yourself you've deemed unacceptable? What if every toxic person in your life has been a messenger, delivering the same urgent telegram from your unconscious? Look at what you refuse to see. The question that will haunt you long after you finished reading this isn't whether this is true, it's what you're going to do now that you can no longer pretend you do and know. Because once you understand that you attract what you refuse to face, everything changes. Every relationship becomes a mirror. Every conflict becomes a revelation. Every person who hurts you becomes a teacher, whether you want to learn from them or not. And that realization, that terrifying, liberating, soul-shaking realization, is just the beginning of understanding how the human psyche actually works, and why Carl Jung believed that our greatest suffering comes not from what others do to us, but from what we do to ourselves when we refuse to look into the darkness we carry within. Carl Jung discovered something that most people spend their entire lives desperately trying to avoid. The human psyche cannot tolerate incompleteness. When you reject a part of yourself, when you decide that anger is bad, that selfishness is wrong, that vulnerability is weakness, that rejected part doesn't simply disappear. It goes underground. It becomes what Jung called the shadow, and like all shadows, it follows you everywhere, growing longer and darker, the brighter you try to make your conscious persona shine. But here is what Jung understood that most people miss. The shadow isn't just personal baggage you carry around. It's an active, intelligent force that has its own agenda. It wants to be integrated. It wants to be acknowledged. It wants to be whole. And if you won't do it consciously, it will find a way to do it unconsciously through the people you attract, the situations you create, and the patterns you compulsively repeat. This is why Nietzsche wrote that what does not kill me makes me stronger, not because suffering itself is valuable, but because suffering is often the only thing powerful enough to force us to confront what we've been avoiding. Your shadow uses other people as its voice, its hands, its way of getting your attention. That cruel partner who withholds love, they're showing you how you withhold love from yourself. That friend who constantly needs validation, they're revealing your own desperate need for approval that you've buried beneath layers of false independence. Viktor Frankl, who survived the Nazi concentration camps, understood this principle from a different angle. In the depths of unimaginable suffering, he realized that we cannot choose what happens to us, but we can choose what it means. But what if we take this further? What if we unconsciously choose what happens to us based on what we need to learn about ourselves? What if our shadow is so determined to be seen that it will orchestrate circumstances that force integration, even if those circumstances are painful? Jung called this process projection, the unconscious act of seeing our own disowned qualities in others. But projection isn't just a psychological defense mechanism. It's the shadow's primary tool for communication. When you feel intense hatred toward someone, you're often looking at a disowned part of yourself. When you're magnetically drawn to someone who ultimately hurts you, you're being pulled toward a quality you possess but refuse to acknowledge. Consider the psychology of attraction itself. Freud believed we're drawn to people who remind us of our parents, but Jung went deeper. He understood that we're drawn to people who embody our unlived lives, the parts of ourselves we've sacrificed in order to be acceptable, lovable, or safe. The rebellious bad boy attracts the good girl who has buried her own wildness. The emotionally unavailable woman attracts the man who has disowned his own need for independence. We don't just fall in love with people. We fall in love with the missing pieces of ourselves that they represent. But this creates a tragic paradox. The very qualities that attract us are often the ones that will eventually destroy the relationship. Because we're not really loving the other person, we're loving our own projected shadow. When the projection inevitably collapses, when we realize they're not who we thought they were, we feel betrayed. But the real betrayal is what we did to ourselves when we gave away our power to someone else to carry our unlived potential. Arthur Schopenhauer observed that we can do what we wish, but we can only wish what we must. What he meant is that our desires aren't as free as we think they are. They are often compulsions, driven by unconscious forces we don't understand. Your attraction to certain types of people isn't random. Your pattern of relationships isn't bad luck. Your repeated experiences of betrayal, abandonment, or abuse aren't evidence that the world is against you. They're evidence that your shadow is trying to show you something crucial about yourself. This is perhaps the most difficult truth to accept. We are not victims of our circumstances. We are the unconscious architects of them. Jean-Paul Sartre argued that we are condemned to be free, that even in the most constrained circumstances, we are choosing our response. But Jung would add that most of our choices are made by parts of ourselves we don't even know exist. The modern world has made this problem infinitely worse. We live in a culture that demands perfection, positivity, and constant self-improvement. We are told to be yourself, while simultaneously being shown exactly which parts of ourselves are unacceptable. Social media creates a world where everyone presents their best face while hiding their struggles, their darkness, their humanity. This creates what Jung called inflation of the persona. We become so identified with our perfect image that we lose touch with our authentic selves entirely. And here's the cruel irony. The more we try to be perfect, the more we attract imperfection. The more we try to be good, the more we attract evil. The more we try to be strong, the more we attract those who will expose our weakness. This isn't cosmic punishment, it's the shadow's attempt to restore balance. It's the psyche's immune system trying to heal the split between who you pretend to be and who you actually are. But most people never realize this. They spend their entire lives wondering why they keep attracting the same toxic people, why they keep making the same mistakes, why they can't seem to break free from patterns that are slowly destroying them. They think the problem is external bad luck, other people's issues, a cruel universe. They never realize that they are both the prisoner and the key, both the victim and the perpetrator, both the seeker and what they seek. This understanding changes everything, because once you see how the shadow operates, once you understand that you attract what you refuse to face, you can no longer pretend that your life is happening to you. You must confront the uncomfortable truth that your life is happening because of you. And that realization, terrifying as it is, contains the seeds of your liberation. But before we can speak of liberation, we must first understand the true cost of living in denial. The consequences of refusing to face your shadow aren't just personal, they ripple outward, creating a cascade of destruction that touches every aspect of your existence and everyone you encounter. This is the part most people never see coming, the hidden price they pay for maintaining their carefully constructed illusions about themselves. Your shadow doesn't just attract toxic people, it transforms you into someone you don't recognize. Every time you deny your anger, it grows stronger underground, emerging as passive-aggressive behavior, chronic resentment, or sudden explosive rage that shocks even you. Every time you refuse to acknowledge your selfishness, it manifests as martyrdom, guilt-tripping, or a victim complex that drains everyone around you. Every time you disown your need for control, it shows up as anxiety, perfectionism, or the compulsive need to fix and rescue others. This is what psychologists call reaction formation, when we become the extreme opposite of what we fear we are. The person who is terrified of being seen as selfish becomes pathologically selfless, sacrificing themselves until they're empty and resentful. The person who fears their own aggression becomes overly passive, allowing others to walk all over them until they explode with suppressed rage. The person who cannot accept their own vulnerability becomes defensively arrogant, pushing away the very intimacy they desperately crave. But the most insidious consequence is how this dynamic creates what Jung called psychological inflation. When you project your disowned qualities onto others, you unconsciously steal their power. You make them responsible for parts of yourself that only you can integrate. This creates a kind of psychological vampirism. You become dependent on others to carry your shadow, which means you can never be whole without them. You become addicted to drama, conflict, and chaos, because without these external mirrors, you would have to face the emptiness within. Consider the neuroscience behind this process. Your brain's default mode network, the part that's active when you're really not focused on anything, Specific is constantly scanning for threats and patterns. When you have unintegrated shadow material, your brain becomes hypervigilant to situations that might trigger it. You literally rewire your neural pathways to notice and attract experiences that will activate your disowned aspects. This is why people who were betrayed keep finding untrustworthy partners. Their brain has been trained to recognize and be drawn to the very red flags they claim to want to avoid. The confirmation bias that results from this is staggering. You begin to live in a reality where your shadow projections seem to be confirmed everywhere you look. If you've disowned your own manipulative tendencies, you'll see manipulation in every interaction. If you've rejected your own neediness, you'll be constantly annoyed by needy people. If you've denied your own capacity for cruelty, you'll find cruel people everywhere you go. Your shadow creates a filter through which you interpret reality, and that filter ensures that you see exactly what you refuse to acknowledge about yourself. But perhaps the most tragic consequence is how this pattern destroys your capacity for genuine love. When you're relating to people through the lens of projection, you're not actually seeing them. You're seeing your own disowned parts reflected back at you. You fall in love with fantasies, not real people. You hate others for qualities you refuse to own in yourself. You cannot truly love another human being until you can love all of yourself, including the parts you've deemed unacceptable. This creates what psychologists call repetition compulsion, the unconscious drive to recreate familiar patterns, even when they're painful. Your shadow will keep orchestrating the same scenarios, attracting the same types of people, creating the same conflicts until you finally get the message. But most people never do. They just assume they have bad luck with relationships, or that all men are toxic, or that all women are crazy, or that the world is full of narcissists and sociopaths. The cultural implications of this are enormous. We live in a society where millions of people are walking around carrying massive amounts of unintegrated shadow material, projecting it onto politicians, celebrities, other races, other religions, other countries. The hatred you see in the world isn't just about external conflicts. It's about billions of people seeing their own disowned darkness reflected in others and fighting to destroy it there rather than facing it within themselves. Social media has amplified this to an unprecedented degree. Every scroll through your feed is an opportunity to project your shadow onto strangers, to feel superior to people you don't know, to rage against qualities in others that you refuse to see in yourself. The algorithm feeds you exactly what will trigger your projections, keeping you addicted to the emotional intensity of shadow encounters while never offering the resolution that comes from integration. But the most devastating consequence of all is what happens to your authentic self while you busy maintaining these elaborate defenses. Your true essence, your creativity, your spontaneity, your capacity for genuine joy gets buried under layers of projection and denial. You become a stranger to yourself, living a life that feels increasingly hollow and meaningless. You achieve all the external markers of success while feeling empty inside. You surround yourself with people while feeling fundamentally alone. You present a perfect image to the world while secretly knowing it's all a lie. This is the prison that shadow projection creates. You become trapped in relationships with people who reflect your disowned parts, unable to leave because they're carrying pieces of your soul, unable to integrate because you don't even know what you're looking at. You become addicted to your own suffering, convinced that your pain is proof of your goodness, your victimhood evidence of your innocence. And here's the cruelest irony of all. The very people you judge most harshly, the ones who trigger your deepest rage and disgust, are often the ones who could teach you the most about yourself if you are brave enough to look. They are your greatest teachers disguised as your worst enemies, your potential healers masquerading as your tormentors. But most people never make this connection. They spend their entire lives fighting external battles that are really internal wars, trying to fix others instead of facing themselves, seeking completion in relationships instead of finding wholeness within. They die never knowing who they really were, never discovering the parts of themselves they sacrificed in order to be loved. This is the hidden cost of refusing to face your shadow. You don't just miss out on becoming whole, you become the very thing you were trying to avoid, unconsciously perpetuating the patterns you claim to hate. But understanding this devastating cycle is also the key to breaking free from it, because once you see how the prison works, you can begin to find your way out. The rebellion begins with a single revolutionary act. You must become willing to be wrong about yourself. Not wrong about your goodness, not wrong about your worth, but wrong about your completeness. You must be willing to discover that you are not who you think you are, that you are both better and worse than your self-concept allows, both more powerful and more flawed than you've ever dared to imagine. This is the most difficult thing you'll ever do, because it requires you to betray your own ego, to turn traitor against the very identity you've spent your entire life defending. Your ego will fight this process with everything it has, because to the ego, integration feels like death. It would rather have you miserable and consistent than happy and whole. But here is where Jung's genius becomes clear. He understood that the shadow isn't your enemy, it is your salvation. Every quality you've disowned contains not just darkness, but also power. Your repressed anger contains the energy you need to set boundaries. Your denied selfishness contains the self-love necessary for authentic relationships. Your rejected vulnerability contains the openness required for genuine intimacy. The very aspects of yourself you've been running from are the keys to your liberation. The first step is radical honesty about your projections. Start paying attention to who triggers you most intensely. What specific behaviors make your blood boil? What types of people do you find yourself repeatedly attracting and then rejecting? These are not random occurrences. They are your shadow speaking to you through others. The person who annoys you most is showing you something about yourself you refuse to see. But don't just intellectualize this, feel it. When someone triggers you, instead of immediately defending yourself or attacking them, pause and ask, how am I like this person? What are they showing me about myself? This question will horrify your ego, which wants to maintain the illusion that you're nothing like the people who bother you. But your shadow knows better. Consider the historical figures who achieved true psychological integration. Gandhi didn't become peaceful by denying his capacity for violence. He integrated it by acknowledging his own potential for aggression and choosing compassion instead. This made his nonviolence genuine rather than passive. Martin Luther King Jr. didn't overcome hatred by pretending he didn't feel it. He transformed it by owning his anger and channeling it into justice. This made his love authentic rather than sentimental. The difference between repression and integration is this. Repression says, I am not angry, while integration says, I am angry, and I choose how to express this energy. Repression creates victims. Integration creates conscious choice. When you own your capacity for cruelty, you become genuinely kind. When you acknowledge your selfishness, you become authentically generous. When you accept your neediness, you become truly independent. This process requires what Jung called holding the tension of opposites. You must be willing to be simultaneously strong and weak, loving and hateful, generous and selfish, spiritual and material. Most people cannot tolerate this paradox. They need to be either good or bad, victim or perpetrator, right or wrong. But wholeness requires embracing paradox, becoming comfortable with contradiction, learning to contain multitudes. The practical work begins with shadow journaling. Every time you judge someone, write down what you're judging them for, then ask yourself, how am I like this? When have I acted this way? What circumstances would make me behave similarly? This isn't about self-flagellation. It's about reclaiming your humanity. You cannot heal what you won't feel, and you cannot integrate what you won't acknowledge. Another powerful technique is what Jung called active imagination, consciously dialoguing with your disowned parts. Imagine sitting across from the aspect of yourself you most despise. What would it say to you? What does it want? What gifts might it offer if you stopped fighting it? This conversation will reveal that your shadow isn't trying to destroy you, it's trying to complete you. The most counterintuitive part of this process is learning to thank your triggers. The people who activate your shadow are your greatest teachers, even if they don't know it, and even if you don't like them. They are showing you exactly what you need to integrate. Instead of seeing them as problems to be solved or avoided, start seeing them as messengers delivering crucial information about your unconscious. But here's what most people miss. Integration doesn't mean acting out your shadow impulses. It means consciously choosing how to express them. When you own your anger, you do and become an angry person. You become someone who can use anger consciously when boundaries need to be set. When you acknowledge your selfishness, you don't become selfish, you become someone who can prioritize your own needs without guilt. This is the path of individuation that Jung described, not becoming perfect, but becoming whole. Not eliminating your darkness, but integrating it consciously. Not avoiding your triggers, but learning from them. It's the difference between being driven by unconscious forces and consciously choosing your responses. The result of this work is profound. You stop attracting people who carry your projections because you no longer projecting. You start attracting people who see you clearly and love you for who you actually are, not for who you pretend to be. You become capable of genuine intimacy because you're no longer hiding from yourself. But the ultimate rebellion is this. You must be willing to disappoint people who only love your persona. You must risk losing relationships built on projection and fantasy. You must choose authenticity over approval, wholeness over acceptability, integration over perfection. This is the hero's journey that Jung understood, not the conquest of external enemies, but the integration of internal opposites. Not the victory of good over evil, but the marriage of light and dark. Not the elimination of suffering, but the transformation of it into wisdom. And once you begin this process, once you start reclaiming your projections and integrating your shadow, something miraculous happens. You discover that you are not broken and in need of fixing. You are whole and in need of recognition. You are not a victim of your circumstances. You are the conscious creator of your experience. You are not at the mercy of others. You are the author of your own story. This realization changes everything, but it's still not the deepest truth. There's one final revelation that will shatter every remaining illusion about how reality actually works. The ultimate truth is this: you don't just attract what you refuse to face. You are what you refuse to face. The separation between you and the people who trigger you is an illusion. The division between your conscious self and your shadow is a construction of the ego. The distinction between what's happening to you and what's happening through you is the greatest deception of human consciousness. Jung discovered something that mystics have known for millennia, but that modern psychology has forgotten. The individual psyche is not separate from the collective unconscious. You are not an isolated entity bumping into random others in a chaotic universe. You are a focal point of consciousness within a vast, interconnected web of being, and every person you encounter is another aspect of the same universal self, experiencing itself through different forms. This is why the ancient Sanskrit greeting, Namaste, means, "The divine in me honors the divine in you," because there is no separation. The divine in you is the divine in them. The darkness you see in others is your own darkness. The light you admire in others is your own light. The love you seek from others is your own love reflected back to you. The hatred you receive from others is your own self-hatred made manifest. When you truly understand this, the entire game changes. You realize that every relationship is a relationship with yourself. Every conflict is an internal conflict projected outward. Every act of love is self-love. Every act of cruelty is self-cruelty. Every moment of judgment is self-judgment. Every experience of forgiveness is self-forgiveness. This is not metaphor or philosophy. This is the literal structure of reality as experienced by consciousness. The boundaries between self and other, between subject and object, between inner and outer, are constructs of the thinking mind that have no ultimate reality. You are not a separate being having experiences with other separate beings. You are the universe experiencing itself subjectively through the lens of apparent individuality. Think about your dreams. In a dream, you might encounter other people, friends, enemies, strangers, lovers. They seem completely separate from you, with their own personalities, motivations, and agendas. They can surprise you, hurt you, help you, or teach you. But when you wake up, you realize that every person in the dream was you. Your unconscious mind created every character, wrote every line of dialogue, orchestrated every interaction. The person who betrayed you in the dream was you betraying yourself. The person who loved you was you loving yourself. The enemy who chased you was your own fear given form. Waking life operates on the same principle, but at a level so deep that most people never recognize it. The collective unconscious is dreaming reality into existence, and you are both the dreamer and the dream, both the author and the character, both the observer and the observed. Every person you meet is another character in the dream, but they are also you dreaming yourself into their form. This is why Jung said that everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. It's not just that others mirror our disowned aspects. They are our disowned aspects, appearing as apparently separate beings to force us to confront what we refuse to acknowledge about our own nature. But here's the most profound implication. If you are what you refuse to face, then healing your projections doesn't just heal your relationships, it heals reality itself. When you integrate your shadow, you're not just becoming whole as an individual. You're healing the collective wound of separation that creates suffering for all beings. When you stop projecting your darkness onto others, you're literally reducing the amount of darkness in the world. This is why the ancient alchemists said that the work of transformation was not just personal but cosmic. They understood that consciousness is not produced by the brain, but is the fundamental substance of reality, and that by transforming consciousness, you transform the very fabric of existence. Every time you choose love over fear, integration over projection, wholeness over fragmentation, you are literally healing the universe. Every time you see through the illusion of separation and recognize yourself in another, you are dissolving the barriers that create suffering. Every time you embrace what you've rejected in yourself, you are making it possible for others to do the same. This is the great work that Jung called individuation. Not just the development of individual personality, but the recognition that individual and universal are one. You are not becoming who you truly are. You are remembering who you have always been. You are not healing from trauma. You are awakening from the dream of separation that is the source of all trauma. The person who hurt you most deeply was showing you how you hurt yourself. The person who loved you most completely was showing you how to love yourself. The person who abandoned you was reflecting your own self-abandonment. A person who saved you was your own power of redemption made manifest. When you fully integrate this truth, something miraculous happens. You stop being a victim of your circumstances and become the conscious creator of your reality. You stop seeking completion in others and find it within yourself. You stop trying to fix the world and start healing your own perception. You stop fighting your shadow and start dancing with it. This is the ultimate freedom that Jung pointed toward, not the freedom to escape your darkness, but the freedom to embrace it so completely that it transforms into light. Not the freedom to avoid difficult people, but the freedom to see them as aspects of yourself in need of love. Not the freedom to create a perfect life, but the freedom to find perfection in the life you're living. You are not attracting what you refuse to face. You are what you refuse to face, appearing as external circumstances to teach yourself what you need to learn. You are both the student and the teacher, both the question and the answer, both the seeker and what you seek. And in that recognition, in that moment of profound self-acceptance, you finally come home to yourself. You realize that you were never broken, never separated, never alone. You were always whole, always connected, always loved. You just forgot how to see it. The journey back to yourself was always the journey toward yourself, and the person you were trying to become was always the person you already are. This is the ultimate truth that Carl Jung discovered and that every mystic throughout history has pointed toward. There is no other. There is only you experiencing yourself through infinite forms, calling yourself back to the remembrance of your own divinity. And in that remembrance, all suffering ends, all searching stops, and all that remains is the eternal dance of consciousness, knowing itself as love.